Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Good morning, Caspar.
Good morning, Russell. How are you?
I'm fine. Looking forward to our next episode.
Oh, goodies. Me too. That's number 4, right?
Yeah, it's number 4. I think we've already covered quite a lot. But in the meantime, I was thinking, we're going to be going in circles again and again. I guess.
True, we will be.
So it's covering every angle. I had the impression that we're not going to be able to cover every angle in the first circle. So we're going to have to turn back and then cross-check.
Yeah.
But today, I think we're talking about ownership, correct?
Yes, correct. Absolutely true. And if you think back and you take a look at the little framework we have here for the people who watch this in a non-podcast way, so more on the YouTube channel, if you remember back the framework, we had 4 main categories, and the second one was called governance. And within governance, there is the topic of ownership. And I think that ownership certainly deserves a bit of our time because it deals with who owns what part of the process landscape in very simple terms. If I take a hammer and I flatten it out, that's what ownership is all about. But there's obviously much more subtlety and nuance to it. And so maybe we can have a little chat about that today, Russell. What do you think?
Yes, and it's something that doesn't necessarily directly jump into your mind when you're talking about governance. So the overarching topic is governance, and within this we want to tick off the ownership. Coming from sponsor, stakeholder, I think ownership seems the natural next topic to talk about.
I think so too.
Because because it's really about the people of it. Governance itself, it sounds like, there's the keeper of the truth and all these aspects. But I think the main point about ownership, and this is something we want to talk about today, is how it has to be distributed. It's not like ownership that is something that could be kept in one hand, which to a certain extent governance is something where it says, somebody's got to take care, somebody's got to tidy up, somebody's got to make sure the rules are applied. And so governance, the ownership of the methodology, which we will be covering with the Center of Excellence, jumps more into your mind. But I think the organizational aspect of process management, or the real success, all lays on establishing ownership, and not just in one single point, like there is one owner, but to think about the whole concept of getting a wide community of people involved and get people to take ownership. And that's what it really is about.
Absolutely.
That's a challenge.
I think you worded that quite well. When you think back to the stakeholder episode we did in episode 3, part of that stakeholder group is the group of owners. It's a major part of your stakeholder group. So I think the ownership topic is very logically next. I also think that there's 2 things that we need to clarify before we dive into the distribution part of it. And that is, I think that there is accountability and responsibility when we talk about ownership. And it might be good for our listeners just to give our view on what is what. And I'll start and then I'll ask you to give your peace of mind on that. I think accountability is something quite ultimate. It's something that stays with you. If you have accountability for something, it's where the buck stops. It's where if the shit hits the fan, you're covered in it. That's what accountability for me means. Responsibility typically means that you're the one also doing the work. And that is something I believe, certainly when we look at it from the perspective of process ownership, is something that you might be able to delegate. The fact that you're a process owner doesn't mean that you need to do everything. It does mean that you're accountable in the end if something goes wrong. At least that's my perspective on it. Any views from your side?
I think in that context, what is important to say, so what are we really focusing on here? And I think when we talk in ownership, and you also said process ownership, it is more about the accountability.
Yes.
Whereas then the delegation of getting things done, like the responsibility, is something where typically you want the people that really are accountable then start thinking about how and who else they get involved to be responsible for getting things done. Yeah? So
Yeah.
that's like the typical leadership management role you would see with the process owners. And what I think around this topic of ownership is important is, and it is always a challenge in setting this up, is accountability for what exactly? And you talk about the processes. So you're talking about the processes, and a lot of the times people say, yes, we already have ownership, or we are accountable for a process, but here we're talking typically about the operative execution of a process. And that typically in an organization, it doesn't matter if it's like a process organization or if it's just a classical, hierarchical organization, that is something that is typically always defined and very often claimed. Yeah. So here people from coming from, let's say, traditionally they say, okay, that's my department. This is also my process. That's mine. Yeah. And so here. This claiming of ownership is something that seems to happen easy.
Yeah.
The real accountability about this on the operative outcome of a process, that's something that's a lot of times written down, let's say, in the incentive program. Yeah, so it says, you have to achieve these and these sales, easiest case, and it's something that is very easy, tangible. But when we're talking about process management, we're talking about, I think you also mentioned in the first episode, we're talking about the process of change in the context of this process. Yeah. So taking up the accountability to strive for excellence in a certain objective, whatever strategic objectives you have for process management. Here, setting down the objective of process management, BPM. Yeah. And owning this process of change in the context of your processes. And that's where things, especially in establishing this, that you see that you have a certain, sometimes even a conflict here, and in establishing this, and you also have to think about, is it the same person or group of people that are actually, on the one hand, accounting or taking ownership for the operative execution of processes and their outcome, and the group of people owning the process of change around a dedicated process. And that's something where there's always a bit of confusion at the beginning. It's quite simple, but you have to then really establish this. And that's
so let's make this concrete with an example, Russell. Let's take my absolute favorite functional domain, procurement. I love procurement. I've been working in procurement for many years in my days at DSM. We had a global process owner in the person of the chief procurement officer. So he was a C-level person. He was responsible for everything that went around procurement. So the buck stops with him when it came to either sourcing or purchase to pay. And he was the global process owner. So he was accountable for anything that went on with relation to purchasing and sourcing processes. Also master data, those kind of things. Vendor data, vendor management, all those kind of things. However, if you look at purchasing, and certainly if you're talking about purchasing of raw materials for production plants, you have purchasing people in the plant who actually run the process. It's that operative execution of a process. The chief procurement officer, so your global process owner, he was not responsible for making sure that the purchasing process from an execution point of view ran in its optimum form in the plant. That was up to the purchasing manager of that particular plant. What he was accountable for was making sure that all of the parameters were set to such an optimal degree that it was as easy as possible for the plant to execute that process. So it was all about process monitoring, process optimization, and making sure that the ground rules and the level play was there, so that the purchasing function in the business groups and in the plants were able to do their work in the most optimal way. And then you get into, so what kind of issues could you then determine? Now, at the moment that you start, for instance, ordering the wrong raw materials, that is not something that ends up with the process owner. That's just an operational issue. But if you, for instance, and we actually had that once, when you have a vendor that calls you and says, listen, I'm not going to deliver the next shipment until you finally start paying my invoices, you might actually get into a process owner accountability because the process is not running as it should, because you should just pay your invoices on time. So just to make that a little bit concrete, so when we talk about accountability for a process owner, we typically do not speak about the operational execution of the process, but about making sure that you facilitate as much as you can to make the process run as optimal as you can.
That's a nice example. The question is, though, is that always the case, or how do you get this established? So let's take this example on, like we're talking about enterprise level, a company with different, let's say, global sites to mix things up and make things a bit more complicated. Now, when these roles are established, typically the necessity to have an overarching, let's say, like CEO, and he has then a corporate purchasing manager to take control of this. Is the idea of process ownership and accountability already something that organizations have in mind? On this, so is it like to say, look, typically if you go through an organization for key functions, there's the process ownership is something that is a natural thing that happens. Or we're talking about, we're not talking about, say, the smaller companies where people are just deep down in operations, yeah? But we're talking about as soon as you do have like a complex global setup and you have typical headquarter functions, and you're looking at these people, and if not, where is there a gap to what we believe needs to be established around process ownership? So just taking this example, because what you said, it sounds like ideal. You have somebody, he's there, the CEO has nominated him, and he's thinking about is how can I set up the process and the environment, the IT systems, and the organization to have all my the operative people doing purchasing have an ideal setup for them to strive for process excellence. Best case metrics as well. That he says, look, these are the strategic guidelines for you to act on. But I have the impression that's not always really the case.
No, I think I agree with that. I mean, the example that I gave obviously is a best practice situation. That's how you would like it to have. That doesn't always make sense. And I think that with running the fear that I might overcomplicate things, it also depends on what type of process you're talking about. Some processes are, I would call them non-differentiating. You need to do them. If we talk about HR, IT, in purchasing, finance, those are typically not your core processes. These are processes that you need to do, but they don't give you any competitive advantage. And in those cases, very often it really helps to have this global process owner that can search for the synergies, that can actually share and mandate, if needed, best practices to make sure that the rest of the organization runs those processes as optimally as possible. If you're talking about core businesses, core processes, it becomes slightly more complicated because there's less standardization drive typically. And ownership, if you centralize ownership on processes, then one of the reasons why you do that is to be more in control of standardization, if and where it makes sense. Another thing that I think that you just gave me an idea. Another aspect of ownership also is, oh God, what's the word again? I forget about that. But anyway, you need to lead by example as a process owner. You have a role. You're a role model. That's the word I was looking for. You're a role model, and I'll give you another example for that. This same CPO went out with a vendor for dinner, and the machine for the credit card payments was broken. So he asked the restaurant to send an invoice for he agreed that they would ask the restaurant for an invoice. And I overheard him saying to his secretary in the office the day after, could you please call the restaurant and ask them for invoice? Which was completely against the policy that we had on reimbursement and expense reports around dinners and meals, which is part of purchasing. Let's be honest, you're spending money on behalf of the company. So I went in, talked to the CPO and said, listen, you're the process owner for purchasing. If there's one thing that you can't do, it's this. So we worked out, and luckily he lived a 3-minute bike ride from the restaurant. So I said, listen, can you please go back today just take your bike, go there and see if the credit card machine now works. And if it works, you pay with your credit card and you follow the regular expense report. And when you do that, I have such a strong case to communicate to the rest of the community. So listen, even our global process owner understands how this process is supposed to work. We don't ask restaurants for invoices, period. The percentage of invoices we got from restaurants after we communicated that dropped significantly. And that is also one of the roles that a process owner, certainly a global one, I think has to play. He or she is a role model.
Oh, wow, that's a nice example. I'm just thinking about that. I'm going to have to top up the way I do my travel expenses because I'm telling all my employees how to do it, and I'm not sure if I really comply to the process myself. Oh, that hurts.
No worries. You'll be fine, Russell.
Yeah, but talking about that, I mean, you're saying about more the operative process. So CPO, good example. Maybe the opposite is then somebody, I don't know, manager for sales, and here they what are they looking at? And then as I said, okay, so here the CPO goes to meal with the vendor. That's something, because then he really is not just thinking about process excellence, but he's thinking about also maybe some strategic sourcing topic to discuss with a vendor, and so here the two worlds mix up. In sales, I'm sure that every month he will be looking at the revenues and thinking about what the hell can I do to get my sales revenues up, thinking strategically maybe about different corporations, about the products that they're selling. The sales team. So definitely he'll be thinking on a very operative level on what needs to be done to really get the sales up to the expected level. And he will feel accountable for the outcome of the process. And when let's say challenged with we need to, let's say, set some strategic goals for sales around the processes. I would say these are more the people that say, whatever it takes to get the sales up. And it's in their nature, it's in their drive, which is good, which is exactly necessary. To be on that level of thinking, also from a management perspective, to streamline sales organizations to go out and sell whatever it takes. And here, you do have some more challenges on saying, okay, but we also need to establish an ownership and accountability for the process change.
True.
And the optimization of the processes around this. And here, I think it is worth, or I would say that here a decoupling of this ownership can absolutely make sense. Because also here the top level management will say, I don't want him distracted. I need him to focus on sales, the revenue, and don't get him bogged down. And it's a different mentality as well. So here we also come down to what skills does a person need to be a process owner in the context of process change and process
absolutely.
excellence.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part that you say. Before I answer to that one, just very briefly hop back to the sales example you give, because I agree to a certain extent with you. So that I want to agreeably disagree for a change. I think that part of your marketing and sales field indeed is subject to, let's say, the expertise of the people running it and the creativity that they need to make their numbers. A large part of it is simply administration, and it's something that you try to standardize. Right? Order to cash is all about, I have a quotation, I have a sales order, I ship it, I get paid for it. I mean, it's the same for almost every type of sale. So again, there, I think there's a distinction between what you can, I would say optimize or harmonize, and what you would like to leave open for individual contribution, so to speak. But the owner, you can still have a global owner, I think, that says, well, for these parts of the domain, we have a more strict policy. For these parts of the domain, we have a more free and open policy. So you can do, it's your expertise that we want to use here. Now, if you translate that to your last remark about what type of person would you need as an owner, I believe, and that's what I typically advise my clients, is that if you're looking at non-differentiating processes, like I mentioned earlier, HR, IT, procurement for indirect materials, stuff like that, finance, you need to have somebody that's like a pit bull, and somebody who's really strives for and continuously pressures maybe not, continuously motivates functional domains to optimize, to harmonize, to standardize if needed. And it needs to be a bit of a bully from time to time, because it's not a natural behavior in organizations. On the other hand, if you're looking at your core parts, so how do I sell, for instance, so the art of maybe doing the whole marketing or quotation process in sales, you need much more of a diplomat, I think. Somebody who's capable of identifying that in different parts of your organization, you might be running the same process in different ways, and you might have spotted a best practice that you then might be able to persuade other units to take a look at that. There's no stick, it's more the carrot. So there, I think, if I think about ownership and personalities, that one comes to mind for me.
So just again to recap, so what when is the case that you have the pit bull?
So I would say that,
versus the diplomat. And I just have to think about this. What if that is it driven by the level of standardization that I in a certain domain that I want to push through?
Yeah.
And that
I think it is
for the pit bull.
Yeah. So if you look at a discipline like HR and IT and finance, with all respect for these, they're still important domains, but they give you no competitive advantage if you're a regular company. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you run these processes as cost effective as possible. Now, one way to run a process across units as cost effective as possible is to harmonize or standardize it. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, purchase to pay, with all respect for that process, is a standard process. Yes, of course, you will have variations left and right because of legislations in countries, and I know that in China you need the e-stamp, but you automate that. The process on the process level is the same everywhere. And I can know because I standardized it across the world when I worked in DSM. It was the same everywhere. So if you want an owner, you need a pit bull for that.
I agree.
Marketing is a different species, or R&D, for instance. That's where you make a difference as a company. That's where you need a diplomat. At least according to me. You're still processing, I can see that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a chicken egg problem I always see here. So is it like the nature of um, around sales? Of course, we always say yes in countries, we have to be much more local in the way we approach the market. Sales in Italy is something different than in Germany. The way they expect rebates to happen, deals to be closed.
Yeah, sure.
There's always a lot of interaction with your customers, and here you have to have a higher level of flexibility. And the customers on a local level, they have their own culture, and this has to be taken into consideration. So here, also from experience, there's always been these two big parts, FICO, the financials and purchasing, highly standardized, and
Yep.
typically also the during the IT initiatives or transformation initiatives, it's always here we have to differentiate in the domains where we have a high level of standardization, and others where we say that's just the nature of the domain, that this is something that we cannot we have to think differently about excellence, and have to be more flexible here. So
Yeah.
I'm still. So reality shows exactly that, and also my experience really covers that. They did say that the skills and the type of process ownership, it depends.
It
And
depends.
the
Yeah.
good thing is, if you look at, say, the people in finances or in purchasing, their nature. If they're
It's true.
purebred purchasing officers, they have their RFPs, and they stick to the procedures, and
Yeah.
and sales guys that say whatever it takes. I need to get
Y-
the revenue in,
Yeah.
and the whole culture around this organization is there. And so maybe looking at that, and of course, as a top level manager, you say, yeah, I still need to give an overarching idea to what this whole company is about, and have a very clear view for where do we want to differentiate, where do we need to be more competitive, where do we not want to fall in the trap of just doing what our competitors do and then falling
Yeah.
behind, but have a very
Yeah.
fine sense of where are we good because we are like efficient, and where are we really good because we are flexible
Yeah.
and are full of innovations, also in our processes, in the way we approach the market.
Yeah.
And that, I think,
True.
what is on a C level, if that is something that is more than just a high level just strategy and vision, but that's something you have to bring through all the roles in a diverse organization that is set up globally. And I think that's
Yeah.
the master art of whatever managers can achieve. And here, then selecting the ownership, establishing that, and also giving, maybe from a high level, giving them also the directives in which direction should this domain strive
Yeah.
to be. I would ultimately say the process ownership on this level of process change are let's say, the owners of actually bringing in the strategic, let's say, envisioned
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
into the domains.
Yeah.
And it's not one size fits all.
No, it's true.
And
It's true. But I think, Russell, and I hate to be a party pooper, but I think we're running very low on time for this episode. But I think that we can take this over into the next one, where we continue our conversation on ownership. Because what we also haven't covered yet is, for instance, the difference in ownership between a functional decomposition and an end-to-end view. And the difference between that, because your process ownership for an end-to-end process is a whole different kind of complexity in some cases. And I would love to pick your brain on that, but we need to save
especially
that
with
for
the
episode number
examples
5.
of exactly, especially with these examples of sales and purchasing,
Yeah.
and then the way
Yeah.
I was digging into sales, I was just thinking the functional, let's get the contract signed, but
Yeah.
then on end to end, that really becomes interesting when we think
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
end to end situation.
So
Yeah, that's
let's
great.
keep that for number 5, and then, as always, Russell, thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Yeah, see you soon. Take
All right,
care.
bye bye. Cheers.
Bye.